In this video, we're going to be taking a look at fractions and decimals, and we're going to take a look at whenever we have a fraction, we're going to see what decimal that represents. Okay, now it is very important that fractions can also be written as decimals, and it's almost like they're related to each other. And we see here a picture of a family. That's kind of like fractions and decimals. They're all part of the same family. Now, before we move on, it is important to remember the names of decimal places or place value. Okay, so this will help you change a fraction to a decimal. So we know from the beginning here that something like this would be 8/10, a fraction like that. Pretty simple. Okay, 27 hundredths would look like this, and 54 thousandths would look like this as a fraction. Okay, so we have tenths, which represents tenths, or my decimals, hundredths, which represents hundredths in my decimal place value, finally thousandths, representing the thousandths in my place value. So it's important to know that before we move into taking a look at fractions and the decimals and so on. It can help you out greatly as we move into this concept. Okay, so we can see right away that 1 over 10, this is pretty simple. 1 over 10 equals 0.1. Okay, or just 0.1 equals 1/10. Pretty obvious there. Okay, now, and we can see that this fraction and decimal actually mean the exact same thing, just a different way of writing it. Okay, if we take a look at another problem here, 3/10, 3 over 10, that's 3/10, and that is equal to 0.3, or 3/10 there. Okay, those fractions and decimals represent the same value. It's just a different way of writing it once again. Okay, so we can see if it ever has a denominator of 10, that means it's just going to be 0.3, or in this case at the top here, 0.1, and so on. Now moving on to the hundredths, if we have 1/100th, okay, that's going to equal 0.01. Okay, and I can even think about this decimal in word form. That would be 1/100th, representing the fraction 1/100th. Okay, now let's take a look at 6/100ths. What would that equal? Now I know the hundredths place, okay, is 2 places to the right of the decimal, so that means my 6 would fall into the hundredths place, so this would give me 6/100ths. Okay, now taking a look at my next one, 53/100ths. Got kind of mixed up here. Let me see if I can move that. There we go. 53/100ths there, 53/100ths here. So 53/100ths, that means it's just 0.53, okay, for 53/100ths there. So you can see, knowing the denominator, knowing your decimal place value will help you out with fractions only with powers of 10, only with 10, 100, and 1,000. Okay, and 10,000 and so on. Not necessarily just some different fractions that we'll look at here in a second. Okay, now if we're taking a look at changing these fractions into decimals, these are pretty simple. We don't need a calculator or anything like that. Fractions to decimals, 7/10 would just be 0.7. Okay, 43/100ths, changing this fraction to a decimal, pretty simple. We're going to put our zero there representing our whole number. We have our decimal and 43. Okay, now if we're going to change these decimals to fractions, okay, what we can do right away, 4/10, because I know that 4 is in the tenths place, so I can write my digit here as my numerator, then my denominator is going to be the tenths place, because that final number falls in the tenths place. Now if I'm reducing this to the simplest terms, that's going to be 2/5. Now my next one, if I'm going from a decimal to a fraction, my numerator is going to be my digit that's in my decimal. My denominator is going to be this final place value, and I know that's the hundredths place, so it's going to be 100. And actually 75/100ths equals 3/4. Okay, my next one, 45 hundredths. You can see I have my 45 is going to be my numerator. My digits and my decimal will be my numerator. The final place value will be my denominator of 100. Now 45 hundredths reduced to simplest terms, that's going to give me 5 twentieths. I'm sorry, that's going to give me 9 twentieths. My mistake. Let me write that again. So 9 twentieths would be my answer, reduced to simplest terms. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some mixed numbers. Okay, and what I want you to do is to write these down with me. And just follow along and write these down as I go through them. So 4 9/10. Okay, my whole number is going to be to the left. Okay, and then 0.9, it would be how I write it. 4 9/10, just like this. Okay, let's say I have 8 7/100. All right, I want you to write this down. 8 7/100. First of all, my whole number will just be written just like this, 8 with a decimal to the right. 7 is going to be in my decimal. However, my 7 needs to fall in my hundredths place. Okay, so I need to write it as 8.07. Now remember, whatever your denominator is in powers of 10, that's what place value that final number needs to fall in. You can see my denominator was 10, so then my 9 needs to fall in the tenths place. My denominator was 100, so that means my 7 digit needs to fall in the hundredths place. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to change these mixed numbers to decimals. Okay, and we're going to do this together. My very first one, 5 125 thousandths. Let's write this out. The whole number is going to be 5. Now, I have 1,000 here, so that means this number, 125, this final 5 is going to need to fall into the thousandths place. Now, this is pretty simple because with decimals, it starts at the tenths, then it goes to the hundredths, then it goes to the thousandths place. So we'll just write 5 125 thousandths, just like that. You can see the whole number. My next mixed number will be the whole number with my mixed number as well here. Okay, so 4 5/10. What we have here, we have our 4 as the whole number, pretty simple. All right, and we have 5/10. So that 5 needs to fall in the tenths place, pretty simple there, for 4.5, or when said in word form, 4 5/10. Now we're going to take a look at these three here. We're going to do these together. We have 0 75 hundredths. The 75 will be written out as my numerator. Then my denominator, since my 5 falls in the hundredths place, that's going to be 100. 75 hundredths is actually equal to 3/4. 8 54 hundredths. Now written as a fraction or a mixed number, we have 8 as our whole number. 54 is going to be my numerator. Since that 4 falls in the hundredths place, that's going to be our denominator. Now we're going to need to reduce this down to simplest terms. Whenever you reduce a mixed number down to simplest terms, it's just the fraction you're reducing. You're not doing anything to the whole number at all. Okay, so we write that 8 over again, and we write 27/50. Reduce to simplest terms. Now my 2 15 hundredths, we write 2. Now since my 5 fell in the hundredths place, we're going to write 15 over 100. All right, and we're going to reduce this to simplest terms. We have 2 3/20 for my answer. Okay, so that's how you take a look at changing mixed numbers into decimals with powers of 10. Now we're going to continue on. Now, what if the denominator isn't a 10, 100, or 1,000? Okay, and what we can do is we can just use our calculator. And the way to do this, and I want you to write this down in your notes, you want to type in the numerator, you hit divide, type in the denominator, hit equal, and then that will give you your decimal. Okay, for example, 9/30ths, that's going to actually equal 3/10 as a decimal. Now, even though it does not come out and say that, okay, in other words, we can't see 3/10 and 9/30ths. If you were to reduce 9/30ths, that would give you 3/10. Okay, so 9/30ths equals 3/10 as a decimal. So we're going to use our calculators on this next step. Okay, so let's say we want to turn this 8 3/20ths to a decimal. Okay, what we do right away before we do anything else, that 8 will always stay the same. So we're just going to write that 8 down again. We're going to put our decimal there. Now we can't just write 3 because it's not a 10, 100, or 1,000. Okay, so what we need to do is take that numerator. We're going to use our calculators, 3. We're going to divide that by the denominator. 3 divided by 20 will hit equal. That gives me 0.15 or 15/100ths. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that 15/100ths and we're going to put it right next to my 8. Okay, so 8 3/20ths written as a decimal is 8 15/100ths. Okay, let's take a look at another one. So let's say we have the decimal, or I'm sorry, the fraction of 2/25ths. All right, now let's say we want to change this into a decimal. There's not a whole number at all, so we can just start this out right away on our calculator. We type in the numerator first. We're going to divide that numerator by the denominator, 2 divided by 25, and that's going to give me 8/100ths. Okay, so what we will do now is we will just write this out. Okay, we can write it as 0.08. Okay, so 2 25/100ths is equal to 8/100ths as a decimal, 0.08. Now we're going to take a look at another one, and I want you to do this problem and write this problem out with me. Okay, what we're going to do is 1 7/8 will be my fraction. We're going to change this to a decimal. So right away my whole number will be 1. Then we'll put our decimal point there. And then 7/8, 7 divided by 8. We'll do right on our calculator. 7 divided by 8. That's going to equal 875 thousandths. Okay, so we need to write point. We have our decimal point already, 875. You can see it's pretty simple. We just divide that numerator and denominator, and that will give us our decimal. Okay, I want you to try this final problem out all by yourself, and it's going to be 8 27/50ths, and I want you to change that to a decimal. And then when you press play, I'll have the answer for you. So I want you to pause the video now. Okay, so what we did, what you needed to do is you needed to write this whole number 8 down again, put your decimal point there, and then what you needed to do was divide that numerator, that 27, divide that by 50, press equal, and that will give you 54/100ths for your answer. So 8 27/50ths equals 8 54/100ths as a decimal. So this is how you work with decimals and fractions, and how you take a decimal and make it to a fraction, and also make a fraction or a mixed number into a decimal. If you have any questions about this concept, please come and see me.